Hi, I'm Jacquire King, and I've been making records professionally for more than 30 years. I've had a fantastic journey and worked with many amazing artists along the way. I've got some tips and tricks I'd like to share with you from behind the scenes of the record-making process. Let's talk about microphone placement. We're going to start with the drums, focusing on simple setups, things that you would do independently in your own home studio. And these, of course, are ideas that you can take to a professional environment and expand on them with more resources, microphones. But we're going to start with the drums. It's a very basic, very powerful technique that you can add microphones to get a bigger, broader sound with more focus on particular elements, like putting a hi-hat mic on, let's say. But let's talk about these three microphones. We have two overheads and one kick drum mic. This is the Glyn Johns technique. Very famous producer-engineer that developed this technique in the late 60s, I believe. And it is a widely used technique. I use it quite a lot myself. If I'm doing a very basic drum sound capture, this is what I do, and it will translate in all genres of music. So the two overheads are not placed over the drums in a stereo pair as is more commonly known as a way to mic a drum kit stereo. There's one over the middle of the drums, over the snare drum. It's kind of a mono overhead, but it focuses more on the snare drum, the rack tom. It's not here just for demonstration purposes. The rack tom would be here, and the hi-hat. Then the other microphone, the other side of the stereo pair, is over here next to the floor tom. Now, you're going to have a ride cymbal here. There's the floor tom, and it captures a little bit of this. And it also gets a little bit more of the kick drum than this microphone that's over the snare. You're certainly going to hear kick drum here, but this has, because it's a little bit lower to the ground and just the way that it works, you get a little bit of a kick drum. So you get, when you pan them out, now I don't typically pan them hard all the way left and right. It's sort of like a middle sort of panning. You don't want your snare drum too far over to one side or the kick drum over to one side too much, because then you kind of lose the focus of the middle. But just a little bit of spread really makes a nice image. So what you get is you're going to get the floor tom and the ride over a little bit more in this mic, and it's going to lean the image that way, and then you're going to have the snare drum and especially the hi-hat that's going to feel a little bit to the other. The way that you keep the snare drum focused in the middle on the two microphones is it's important that this microphone is high enough so that it's listening to the floor tom, obviously, because it's very close to it, but it's listening, looking over it. So I have a microphone cable, so you can take a spare microphone cable, and this is how you keep the snare drum in the center of the image, and this is important. Now, some people say that there's a specific distance they should be. Maybe there is. I've never been able to ask Glyn Johns that question myself, but my feeling is it has to accommodate the size of the drum kit. What's really important in keeping the snare drum in the middle is that we take a measurement from the center of the snare drum to the overhead mics. Now, I've heard that there's a specific distance that this needs to be, that there's a prescribed measurement. I've never had the opportunity to ask Glyn Johns myself or have heard anything specifically from him about it, so I don't know that that's as important as making sure that they're equal distance. Obviously, depending on the size of the kit and the ability to place the microphones, that's going to dictate a little bit of the distance. But what's important is that once you've placed the microphones, that they are pretty much equal distance from the center of the snare. That helps. The snare drum's typically the loudest thing that's happening in a drum kit. What you also want to consider in that is where they're placed in relationship to the drum kit. Now, sometimes this microphone can kind of be back around a little bit further. If you have two floor toms, you might want to put it in between them so that it's hearing equal volume of the floor toms. And you know, so this can kind of move around here. Main thing is just to kind of keep it on this radius. And then this microphone, you want it a little bit over the snare drum. If I were to drop straight down from the microphone. It's just over the snare drum a little bit, so that means it's going to be hearing the rack tom really well. So while this is going to be floor tom dominant, this one's actually going to be rack tom dominant, and because the rack tom's up a little bit higher, it's going to speak really well in this microphone. Hi-hats can be really loud and precise, so you're going to get a really nice balance. The one other microphone that we have to talk about in this setup is the kick drum. Now, there's a lot of ways to mic a kick drum. I prefer, even in a multi-miking setup, to have pretty much just one microphone on the kick drum. A lot of times in a multi-mic setup, you have a kick drum mic way inside the drum. There's a lot of attack. You don't really get the full low-end development and resonance from the drum. So I like to be more in the center. On this particular drum, this is my personal drum kit, I have this hole cut in the center because I want to try to focus the microphone lens, if you will, at where the beater hits inside. You know, sometimes you have a hole here, that's fine. You just want to be able, you want to kind of try to find the focus and point the microphone to where the beater hits the batter side of the kick drum. I like the microphone just maybe an inch away from where the front head is, to let the low end develop a little bit, but that the microphone's not too far away where you're getting a lot of leakage from the other elements of the drum kit, especially cymbals, because this is about the low end of the kit. You don't want to deal with a bunch of high ends. You might want to add a snare drum mic. If you do, great. So I just wanted to show you quickly how I specifically tend to start to mic a snare drum. So now I put the microphone over here, but so that you can see it in the camera angle, I'm just going to do it from this side. I like the microphone a little bit over the drum, and maybe an inch, inch and a half over, like over the distance from the head, and about the same distance in from the edge of the rim, right? So we've got pretty much like a little equal triangle here, okay? And it's looking at the center of the drum. You're going to get a little bit more attack this way. As you steepen the angle of the microphone, you're going to be listening deeper into the drum. You're going to get a little bit more of the shell and resonance of it by miking like this versus this. This is going to be more about the attack and the air. So you can tonally adjust it by doing that. Hopefully these little tips on drum miking give you a good place to start. This is a super solid way to get a great drum sound. Guitar amps. Let's talk about putting microphones on guitar amps. I typically like to use a couple microphones. An SM57, a great dynamic mic, gets used a lot on guitars, and then some sort of condenser microphone. This is a 414 version. So let's talk about this a little bit. Placing the microphones on the amp, they shouldn't necessarily be super close. You want them back a little bit to let the sound develop. I mean, you can come pretty far back, but then you start to bring other things into play the further you get away. You start to get room tones. I generally like just a few inches in front of the grill of the amplifier. Something that's very important is where the diaphragms are in the microphones. They should be pretty matched up. If you have them too far away from each other, you're going to get some comb filtering and some phase cancellation. So, because typically I like to combine them to one track. Now, sometimes you can look at them on two separate tracks to sort of help you fine-tune your adjustment, but you want the diaphragms to be pretty much exactly the same distance from the speaker cone. And then a way to check that is flip the polarity on one of them, and the better sound will be more volume, more full frequency. So, in placing the microphones, there is a dust cap. There's the center of the speaker that is a little bit of a dust cap where most of the high frequencies come from on the speaker. And as you move out towards the edge of the speaker, the tone, it gets darker. This is where more of the low frequencies are. I think the place to start is where the dust cap, the little round circle in the middle of the speaker, meets the paper or the woofer, the cone. Where that intersection is the place to focus the placement of the microphones. And so a flashlight will help you see where that is, because Sometimes the speaker is offset, sometimes there's multiples, and the dust cap is not always the same size. It depends on the make of the speaker and how it physically is configured. That's the place to start in terms of close miking technique and placement. Now, other ways to mic an amp are you can put a microphone, this is an open back cabinet, you can put a microphone behind. It's going to be not as bright. You're going to get a lot more cabinet sound and resonance. A room mic, something distant, can be nice. And you're going to have to check the polarity and see how these sounds combine. Definitely if you have a mic in front and then a mic behind, like this, most likely you're going to have to flip the polarity on the one that's behind. Another technique that in close miking, as I've already described, you can do is you can set one of the microphones off axis at a 45-degree angle. Quite typically, that's done with the same microphone as opposed to having two distinctly different sounding microphones that you can blend. You know, in this pair, the louder this signal is, the brighter typically the tone will be. Or vice versa. This will be a little bit darker mid-rangey, but they can help balance each other out and fill each other out. In the technique I'm about to describe, you typically want to use two of the same microphones, maybe two 57s. And what you would do in this case, one 57 would be on axis, and then the other one would be at a 45-degree angle. Now, the reason you do that is you are going to get some phase comb filtering, but it can be a really good way to balance the two against each other, and it'll help clear up some of the mid-range. In blending them, it will give you a good opportunity to have a little bit of that filtered sound that can be really cool for a particular part. I hope these ideas help and that you can get some great guitar tones. So let's talk about miking an acoustic guitar. Place you want to start is somewhere typically between the 12th fret and where the neck meets the body, just in this area right here. So the reason to do that is because it's the most balanced perspective sound-wise between the big boomy low-end tone of the body and sort of where the strings are sort of resonating a little bit away from how the body is resonating. So this is kind of the place to start. The more you move towards the headstock up the neck, the less you're going to get of the tone of the body, so it's going to be a little bit brighter. And then conversely, the more you move it towards the body, the darker it's going to be. So then you also need to think about the distance away, the mic is away from the guitar itself. Now, that can depend. I think a good place to start is about 6 to 8 inches away. I oftentimes will ask someone to play the guitar, and then I'll just kind of like listen around in this area with one of my ears and just try to find that balanced tonal spot. Now, you know, sometimes you want to get further away because depending on the guitar, the tone may not develop until the sound has a little bit more time to travel. And then sometimes, you know, the sound of the fingers moving on the guitar is helped a little bit by getting a little bit of distance and just letting it develop. Now, depending on the space you're recording in, you don't want to get too far away because then you start bringing in ambience, and then as you get further away, you also lose the dramatic change between the neck and the body tonally. Now, if we were to add a microphone to this and make it kind of a stereo pair, then instead of this microphone, the more articulate sounding microphone being sort of more face on, I might move it over here a little bit, or I might move it over this way just a little bit so that it's focused a little bit more on the neck, and then I'd put another microphone over here just to kind of get a little bit more of the warmer sound. Typically don't want to ever put a microphone in front of the sound hole because there's a lot of air coming out of here, and it just kind of sounds muddy. It's necessary for the guitar to speak properly tonally, but you don't want the microphone here because it's a very dark and kind of muffly sound that kind of comes directly out of the sound hole. So, you know, and where you have more structure and acoustic space, and where this is larger, it's going to resonate more, so you want to have a microphone over here. And now sometimes, depending on the guitar, it's also nice to mic above. And because you can often get a balanced sound up here that doesn't have all this big boomy low end. And, you know, so just a microphone over the shoulder can be good. Now, you can combine all three of these, but if you're just a single microphone technique, this is the place to start, between the 12th fret and where the neck meets the body. 6 to 8 inches away is a place to start. And also use your ear, just listen in that area and try to figure out what's the most tonally balanced. So let's talk briefly about setting up a vocal mic for a vocalist. You want to make sure that the vocal mic is high enough to keep the posture up. You don't want the microphone too low so that it kind of like is collapsing the stomach and the chest. You want, and the roof of the mouth, you kind of want to extend and open these things up. Now, obviously, depending on a person's comfort, you have to accommodate their requests, obviously. But the place to start is at a height where they're just, it's not quite eye level because, you know, the sound's coming out of here, but to where you have to lift their chin up just a little bit to address the microphone. And this kind of helps open up, to keep the body open, and it's a more balanced tone. And because when you get the head down, the sound is gonna be a little bit dark and masked. It's not gonna project as well. This is sort of how you want to be, like looking slightly up. This might be just slightly high, but then again, it's about someone's comfort, really. You know, this is a great way to start and a target, and sort of explain why. Now, the other things to keep in mind is I'm using a large diaphragm microphone. This is a Singular Audio F48. So it's a condenser microphone, needs phantom power. Condenser microphone, it's a large diaphragm. They are more sensitive to level in general, but a large diaphragm microphone is also really sensitive to low end. So you're going to need a windscreen or pop filter. And this is also a good mechanism to regulate the distance that the singer is from the microphone, because as someone gets really close in on the mic, you get low end buildup, you get a proximity effect. So by having this as kind of the thing to sing up against, it keeps them away from the microphone, and you can kind of help balance the tone that way and not have to deal with as many plosives and low end. And speaking of plosives, that's also what the windscreen or pop filter does, is it kind of shields some of that low frequency, breathy, booming sound that can happen. It won't eliminate it, but it will definitely help. So the distance is important, proximity effect, head up a little bit, and then the windscreen will also keep those plosives away. We're talking about microphone techniques, but making a vocalist comfortable is the #1 priority. So make sure that the lights are at a good level for them. Make sure that they understand how to use the headphone system, that you have some reverb and delay ready for them before you put them on the microphone. Don't let somebody get on the microphone to a dry vocal. You know, they'll tell you more or less reverb. You maybe ask before you have them step up to the mic. Put the headphones on yourself and listen. Does it sound like your voice? Do you hear yourself well in the headphones? Balance an appropriate amount of reverb or delay for them, and kind of get it set, because as soon as they put those headphones on, you want them to feel relaxed and confident. And you taking care of your job will make those things go faster, because they're going to need a second to warm up, most likely, and get comfortable and adjust the mix. So the less back and forth and fooling around that you're doing, it'll be the better for them to give you the performance that you're after. Technique and mic placement is very important when capturing vocals, but it's not like putting a microphone on a snare drum where the instrument is in a fixed position. You know, the vocalist is going to be moving around, and it's about their comfort. if we just briefly talk about if someone's seated and they're kind of like playing guitar and they're a little bit, you know, hunched over, that's fine. You don't want to get them in a comfortable position, but you do want to kind of think about this, try to translate this technique a little bit. But you know, if their head is down, you can change the angle of the microphone so that you're still addressing, you know, them and get them to just lift their head a little bit, but it's kind of more about the posture. Hopefully these vocal miking tips help you make better recordings. Let's talk a little bit about how we might go about selecting a vocal microphone for a vocalist. Set up 4 microphones here. They're all pretty different. We have 3 condenser microphones. That's actually, Townsend Lab is a mic modeling microphone, so really it can be almost anything. Singular Audio F48 is a microphone modeled after a FET47, large diaphragm condenser. Takes phantom power. We have an SM7 dynamic microphone, and then lastly, that's an advanced audio. It's an advanced audio. It's a 67 copy. I don't remember the exact model number of this, but this is a tube microphone. So it has a tube in the body of the microphone and a tube power supply. So very similar, but with the tube, it's going to have a little bit of a warmer sound. So just the idea here is that I have 4 different sounding microphones, and I'm going to have my vocalist sing on each one and sort of see which one suits their voice best. And then after that, the next part of the process of selecting a vocal microphone, or a vocal chain really, is to then, once I've identified, and also oftentimes the vocalist, having heard themselves on the headphones, will be able to give you some feedback about what they felt most comfortable hearing. It sounded exciting to them, or the most representative of their voice. Let's say we've selected the Advanced Audio U67. We take all of our available mic pre's and go one by one, putting the U67 into the individual mic pre's and listening to how the vocalist sounds on each one, finding the one that best matches the voice and the microphone. Once we've selected our mic pre, the final step will be to select a compressor. Now, as you're going, you should be recording every take so that you can listen back and compare them, and you can have the vocalist come into the listening environment with you and make that evaluation, and you can have a discussion about it. So once you've done that, the final thing will be to pick a compressor. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be analog compressor or mic pre. These things can be emulations. In the same way that the Townsend can emulate a bunch of different microphones, you just record the signal and then you can audition different mic models from that point. So every step of the way, record what you're doing so that you can review it. So now that you have the recording of the selected microphone and the selected microphone preamp, the thing to do will be audition compressors. And you can do that with a hardware insert if you're using an analog piece of gear, and then move it over to the analog chain into the DAW, or you can do it all in the DAW and use a plug-in compressor. So once you have identified the microphone, the preamp, you identify the compressor, and then you should be good to go. One further thing I would say is that in doing this, obviously the singer is going to be singing a lot, but I would just limit it to maybe the loudest chorus you might have, or the dynamically the biggest section, and another section that's maybe a lower dynamic in the song. Oftentimes you're going to find that it's best to sing the second verse and the second chorus as a thought about how to start with that. Hopefully this helps, and it makes for great vocal recordings.